And the live stream has started.
All right, so we are at the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to our final parallel session in this year's OR 2021. So you're in Zoom room number 2, and I hope you're here for our final panel, which is Dataverse Community and CoreTrustSeal certifying generalist repositories. Before we get started with this panel, I just want to remind you of the Open Repositories Code of Conduct. We want to ensure that this environment is safe and equitable for everyone. So if you notice or are affected by any issues, please make sure to let us know about them using the email address that's in our Code of Conduct. And of course, I want to give a big thank you to our sponsors who helped to make this conference possible. And with that, I will let Katie take it away, and she has generously volunteered to introduce her panelists and also moderate the questions at the end.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining this morning, or I guess my morning. It could be the afternoon where you are. All right. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Great. Okay. All right. So I just wanted to kind of give a quick overview, welcome you guys to our panel. So this is going to be our panel talk on Dataverse Community and CoreTrustSeal certifying generalist data repositories. As Liz mentioned, Katie Micah, I'm the data services librarian at Harvard Libraries, where I also work very closely with the Institute of Quantitative Social Science and the Dataverse team over there. And I'll be moderating this. I've had a little bit of internet issues for the last few days, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off my video. But I just wanted to say hello first, but just out of an abundance of caution to make sure everything goes smoothly. All right, so we're going to have 3 panelists today briefly speak about their experiences with CoreTrustSeal, either as a representative or as a Dataverse repository that has applied for or is applying for certification. So Robert Downs is going to be our first speaker, and he is the Senior Digital Archivist and Acting Head of Cyber and Informatics Research and Development at CISIN, the Center for International Earth Science Information Network at the Earth Institute of Columbia University. And he's going to speak about CoreTrustSeal and the certifying body's goals and perspectives related to generalist data repositories. Philip Konzett is a senior research librarian at UT, the Arctic University of Norway. He is part of the repository management of Dataverse NO and of Trolling, the Tromsø repository of language and linguistics, and will speak about Dataverse NO's successful CoreTrustSeal certification process. And finally, Sonia Barboza is manager of curation for Harvard Dataverse and manager of the Murray Archives at the Institute for Quantitative Social Science at Harvard University. She will outline Harvard Dataverse's approach to applying for CoreTrustSeal certification for a portion of managed collections within the self-curated repository. And just before we get started with the panelists, I wanted to give kind of a quick overview of the Dataverse software and repository community, if you're not familiar with it already. The Dataverse project is an open source web application to share, preserve, cite, explore, and analyze research data. It facilitates making data available to others and allows users to replicate others' work more easily. Researchers, journals, data authors, publishers, data distributors, and affiliated institutions all receive academic credit and web visibility. As of yesterday, there are 69 Dataverse repository installations worldwide. To facilitate engagement across all types of user groups, the Dataverse community hosts bi-weekly community calls to discuss development processes and priorities. The Global Dataverse Community Consortium is the administrative body that coordinates activities across participating installations. And we host an annual community meeting, which is happening next week, if you're interested, to present updates, installation activities, strategic priorities, and generally talk about using Dataverse. Each Dataverse repository is created and owned by a different institution or organization, and they are functionally separate repositories. So this means that each repository that applies for and CoreTrustSeal certification is their own separate entity. Harvard Dataverse has not yet received CoreTrustSeal certification, but Dataverse NO has. And then briefly, this image kind of describes the general architecture of Dataverse. A Dataverse repository is the software installation, which then hosts multiple virtual archives called Dataverse collections. Each Dataverse collection therein contains data sets, and each data set contains the descriptive metadata and data files, including documentation and code that accompany the data. And then this is just another view of the same concept and highlights that multiple Dataverse collection and data sets can be collected into a higher level Dataverse collection. So kind of similar to a folder hierarchy or a directory structure. So with that, I will go ahead and pass it over to Robert Downs, who is going to be our first speaker. So take it away, Robert.
Great. Thank you very much, Katie. And thank you also to all the organizers for putting this together for us. And let's see. If I can do this right. Can't quite see. Yes, there we go. Oops, let me go back. Okay, great. So can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about certifying trust across evolving models of repositories. And to do that, I would like to first give you a little bit of context for the evolution of data repositories. So if we think about how data was distributed traditionally, there were explorations either on land or sea, and they started to organize their observations into tables, and these were often recorded in reports or logbooks or notebooks. And the plan was to deposit them in a central archive, and these were various kinds of locations, including museums or libraries. Around 1957-58, they realized that we needed to begin to organize better and to provide access to these data for the larger public, I should say basically the larger population of researchers, so that data was not just shared amongst a small group. So the World Data Center system was established at that point, and one of the mandates was to preserve the data and enable access to it, not only currently but in the future. For those who might be familiar with ICPSR, it was actually formed as ICPR, the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research, back in 1962. And then another milestone we might observe is in 1994, NASA established the EOSDIS, or the Earth Observing System Data and Information System, and that included a network of distributed active archive centers, or DACs. And I work at one of them. I work at CDAC, the Socioeconomic Data and Application Center, which is operated at CSUN at Columbia University. Around 1996, the community realized that we needed better coordination of these efforts, and realized that standards and coordination was needed, so that there would be a way for the different repositories to ensure that they're doing the right thing in terms of providing ongoing access to their data. And it was recognized that certifying repositories would take us a long way in this direction. So a nice way to look at this, if we look at the bottom of this chart, is the Open Archival Information System reference model, often just referred to as OAIS. That really came out, was really developed after that Garrett and Sawyer report, but it came out in 2002, 2003. It was published by the CCSDS and is available for free from the CCSDS, or you could buy it from ISO. It was since updated in 2012, and we're currently updating it again. So ISO reports or standards generally get updated every 5 years or so. But out of the OAIS initiative, several digital repositories started to, or standards, I should say, started to emerge. And so we see the Drambora, some of you might have remembered that, the Nestor Seal, which is still around. The track was established for audit and certification, and the criterion checklist, and then the data seal of approval. And there were many more, but these were some of the more popular ones. And then in Europe, they created the European Framework for Audit and Certification, where it was recognized that getting the ISO 16363 certification, that is for trustworthy certification of digital repositories, would be the ideal. But Nestor seal was another way to go. And then the data seal of approval was a path to entry for that. And so this was recognized as a way to go, but out of that, and right after that, the ISO 16363 was officially published as an ISO standard. The AGU and the Carnegie Mellon came up with the data management maturity framework, and the World Data System, which was an evolution of the World Data Centers that we had talked about earlier. They established certification requirements in 2011. Interestingly, the data seal of approval and the World Data System certification requirements were merged in 2016 to create the Core Trustworthy Data Repository requirements. And so CoreTrustSeal was then established, and that's a nonprofit. It's out of Netherlands. I think it's called a stichting, which is a term for a nonprofit organization. And CoreTrustSeal manages the review process. They have an assembly of reviewers, and out of that assembly, there's a standards and certification board that's elected. And then we review the requirements and revise them every 3 years. We're planning to revise them, start revising them next year. And then we're having ongoing communications with the community to identify needs and how they might be able to be addressed. So the structure of the CoreTrustSeal requirements include background information, an organizational infrastructure, that is requirements that talk about the mission of the organization, the staffing, the structure within the organization, and policies, procedures, and how they get their expert guidance, as well as how they're handling continuing access and confidentiality and ethical issues. Next is digital object management, and that contains the bulk of the requirements. So this is looking at operationally how the digital objects are managed. So it's talking about aspects like appraisal and storage, and most importantly, how all these things are documented so that there's an ongoing operational aspect to the work. That is, each time a data product is disseminated, it's going through a process that is understood by all those who are involved, including the data producers and the data users. And then the last section is involved with the technology, and it's focusing on the technical infrastructure and the security aspects. And this is critical because we certainly need to make sure that the repository is identifying the risks and protecting itself against such risks and has plans in place to do so. So when an organization or repository is applying for the CoreTrustSeal certification, they have a choice on the compliance level they would select. And so here you see there are 4 choices. Ideally, we would want all the repositories to be striving to achieve 4. That is, where they have implemented the requirement in their repository. But certainly, a repository doesn't have to have 4 in every single requirement. We would like to see most of the requirements attaining a 4 where they have implemented them. But if they're on their way to implementation for some, well, that's great. I look at the CoreTrustSeal certification process as in a really simplistic manner, and this might even be oversimplifying it, but if we look at it in terms of the application process, we do need to initially prepare the evidence, and that might mean really doing an internal audit of your repository or self-assessment, if you will, to make sure that you are identifying any areas where you need to improve on them, and certainly to improve on them and document all your processes so that they could be presented as evidence in your application. Once this is done, you can write up your responses or write a draft of them and review them within your organization and then submit your application. There is an application fee, but there's also a process to waive that application fee or to request a partial waiver of it. And the general idea here is for developing countries, repositories in developing countries to be able to get certified as well. But we all understand that, it's difficult to operate a repository often, and getting funding is a challenge. So the review process, usually 2 reviewers take a look at the application, and they discuss their concerns with each other, and then they present their concerns to the board. The board reviews the concerns as well as looking over the application as well, and they make a decision either to return or to certify it. And to be quite frank, I'm not sure I've seen any that have gone through immediately towards certification. I think all applications have to go back at least once because there are some issues with it. And then upon the iterations of the review process, upon completion of that, the certification will enable the repository to be certified, and their application will be posted publicly on the CoreTrustSeal website so that everybody can see that. They're also eligible to apply for membership in the World Data System, and the application would expire in 3 years. And as you might recall, the CoreTrustSeal requirements are getting reviewed and revised every 3 years. So when an organization goes to apply again, the requirements will be a little different. Basically, we're evolving with the technology and with the needs and expectations of the community. But we also have identified the need to evolve the CoreTrustSeal requirements. They were initially focused on domain repositories, but generalist repositories and technical repository service providers have asked for a way to get certified. And so we've been working with them and identifying how there are differences amongst generalist repositories and technical repository service providers that would affect the requirements. And so we are working with the community to review the requirements and looking at different models for certification. The CoreTrustSeal is welcoming everybody's comments on these issues. If you go to the CoreTrustSeal website, you'll see that there's a ongoing discussion. You can sign up for the newsletter, and we really can't get enough information, because next year, as I mentioned, we'll be revising the requirements, and we need to see how that's going to be done. And it's really going to come from what the community says. So we have identified some differences between the specialist and generalist repositories. And you can see here, obviously, the designated community is the big one, as well as community oversight and disciplinary focus. But there are big differences. For example, a domain repository might be looking for specific types of content, such as data or documentation, where a specialist or a generalist repository, they might be open to any kind of content that comes in about any topic even, and in any format. If you're a domain repository, you might be focused on only providing your data in formats that the community is familiar with and can use, and that they have tools for using. So these are the kinds of things that are affecting the revision of the requirements. And so as I said, any additional suggestions would certainly be most welcome. And
all right, Bob, can we finish up in about 1 minute, just to make sure there's time for questions at the end?
Certainly, yes. And so these are some of the differences or areas that you can see in terms of where differences might be lying. And also, here are some examples of different types of implementations that could affect the types of repositories. I just wanted to show you the OAS functional requirements in case you're not familiar with them. And these are some of the questions that we might want to investigate in order to determine how to evolve the CoreTrustSeal requirements going forward. I'm going to leave you with a bunch of references here. So thank you very much for your attention, everyone.
Thanks so much, Robert. All right, Philip, off to you.
Yeah, thanks. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we see the, not the presenter view, just the...
Yeah, great. Okay. Yeah, so thank you for organizing the session and for inviting me to talk here today. Here is the outline of my presentation. First, some key facts about Dataverse NO. And then I'll talk about some experiences from our certification work with CoreTrustSeal, and then I have some idea about where to get help for certification. So first some background information about Dataverse NO. It's a national generic repository for open research data, mostly from researchers from Norwegian research organizations. It's a curated repository and it's aligned with the FAIR principles, and it's also CoreTrustSeal certified. So that's the reason why I'm here today. It runs on the Dataverse software and it's operated at my university, UiT, the Arctic University of Norway. It's a national repository, as I said. It has an institutional focus. So we currently are 9 partner institutions. They are all universities or university colleges, but we also are open for researchers from other Norwegian research organizations. So currently we have data from researchers affiliated with approximately 40 Norwegian research organizations. And it's a generic repository, as I said. So we accept all types of research data from all domains of science. And in this graph, you see the distribution across domains. So as you see, there is a high number of data sets from physics and earth and environmental sciences. That's due to some large time series, but most of our data are background data for publications. So then to the certification of our repository. So the reason why we wanted to achieve certification is, of course, to demonstrate our commitment to fair data stewardship and trustworthy and sustainable repository management. Here is just to repeat the requirements that Rob also presented a while ago. So there are 16 requirements. I, of course, cannot go into all of them, but let me first tell you something about our application process. We started working on our application early in 2018. We were 3 people from the library who are all in the repository management of the repository. And we also got some help from our IT department. None of us had done this kind of self-assessment before. So we divided the CoreTrustSeal, the 16 CoreTrustSeal requirements between us, and then we followed up with common discussions about what we found out. We submitted our first version of the application at the end of June 2018, the same year. And then we submitted 2 more versions. As Robert says, it's quite usual that you submit, you get feedback and you submit a revised version. And we got some valuable feedback from the consultants. And then finally, we obtained the CoreTrustSeal at the end of March 2020. So it took quite a long time. So of course we didn't work on this. It was not our main task. We had a lot of other tasks to do, but it took about 2 years, all in all. So our main challenges we had in this work was, for the first, we wanted to certify the entire repository. And as you saw, there is a distributed organization with different members, different partner organizations, which includes multiple institutional collections. So this caused some challenges, mainly related to data and metadata quality, but also organizational infrastructure. And another main challenge was to establish a fully fledged preservation plan. So first to the challenges relating to organizational infrastructure. For instance, one challenge was to ensure data and metadata quality across collections. So how would we do this? And our approach was to define a set of common policies and guidelines that will be applied to all data in the repository. And this includes our policy framework that we started to develop when we were in the certification process. And this covers access and use, accession, deposit, and preservation. And these policies, they are fleshed out in guidelines aimed at depositors, curators, and administrators, or collection managers. And another main approach to solve this challenge, or to address this challenge, was to introduce curation. So all data sets are curated by research data support staff before they are published. So to ensure compliance with our deposit guidelines. Yeah. So the main challenge relating to organizational infrastructure is that, as I said, the collection management or the responsibility for the collection management and data curation is distributed among the partner institutions. And the challenge here is to ensure that they all have sufficient resources and qualified staff allocated to maintain their collection. And our approach to address this challenge is basically through our partner agreement, which obliges our partner institutions to manage their collections in compliance with our common policies and guidelines. But here we actually did not kind of convince the consultants, CoreTrustSeal consultants, or CoreTrustSeal board, because this was not quite sufficient for compliance at level 4. So we were asked to provide more specific documentation of resources and qualifications. So we will have to revise our documentation in the next round of certification in 2 years. So we will have to point to a common skills framework, and we are now working on this basically on a national level. We have just got some funding from the National Library within our national RDA node to establish a national skills framework for research data management. And the other main challenge, as I said, was to define a preservation plan containing specific preservation actions. We, of course, when we started working on our certification process or application, we reviewed existing certified repositories and what kind of documentation they had and what kind of approaches. And surprisingly, we didn't find, or we found a lot of high-level preservation policies, but not so much about detailed plans for preservation. So finally, we found a kind of theoretical outline of how to systematically planning for digital preservation. This is this article by Becker and al. From 2009, but it was still quite challenging to find good examples of actual specific data preservation plans for research data repositories. Most of the preservation plans we found are for single research projects or library collections and so on, but not for research data repositories. Yeah, but finally we worked this out and created our specific preservation plan. Yeah, where to get help with your certification? Maybe Sonia will talk more about this, but I just wanted to mention that there is now has been established a Dataverse software guide for CoreTrustSeal certification. So the Dataverse community has written a guide to help Dataverse-based repositories apply for CoreTrustSeal certification, and the guide describes basically how the core functionality and design principles of the Dataverse software, and also the Dataverse community can help repositories complete most of the sections in the CoreTrustSeal application. But I think you should still remember that much of the CoreTrustSeal requirements is actually about policies and good routines, not only about the technical infrastructure. Yeah, and I think also other projects and communities could help repositories with their certification, for instance, by establishing common frameworks for instance, preferred file formats for long-term preservation. So right now, each repository has to come up with their lists about lists of preferred file formats. I think this could be kind of coordinated, and also common frameworks for preservation plans, or in more general terms, for research data repository policies. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Philip. Great, as always. All right, Sonia, our last panelist, take it away.
All right, give me 1 second to just get on my window. One second. That's actually not what I want to share. I think this is the one I want to share.
I think it was actually the other one, Sonia. This is like the timer with your notes on it.
Ah, awesome. I don't want to see that. Took me a little while to get it before, so I'm not surprised it's going to take me a second to get it now as well, because I need to restart my. Can you see my notes now?
Nope, we just see the screen.
Awesome, wonderful. Hello, everyone. My name is Sonia Barboza, and as Katie mentioned, I manage curation for the Harvard Dataverse repository, and I manage the Murray Research Archive. And today I'm going to talk about the Harvard Dataverse repository model that we will be considering submitting to the CoreTrustSeal for certification. We worked on this model with my team, which includes Katie and 2 other staff members, including the development team and someone from the Harvard Library, since the Harvard Library supports the Dataverse repository at Harvard. So today I'm going to give you a brief introduction to the Harvard Dataverse repository, since Katie has covered much of the software that it's based on. I'm going to talk about kind of the conversation we had when we considered applying for the CoreTrustSeal certification. We're going to talk about our model and documentation that we've created to support Dataverse installations that are going to pursue CoreTrustSeal certification, and our managed collections, which came out of this model for our repository. So the Harvard Dataverse is a generalist data repository, and it's open to the worldwide research community and built using the Dataverse software. The repository was established in 2006, primarily to support the sharing and preservation of social science data, but it quickly became a home to numerous other disciplines, including chemistry, the life sciences, physics, engineering, medicine, and math, to name a few. Our repository is supported by a self-curated and self-managed curation workflow, meaning that authors and data managers and curators are responsible for creating and managing their content with our support. So now we're going to talk about our considerations that went into applying for the CoreTrustSeal certification, being that we are generalist repositories and people do their own curation when they come to the Harvard repository. So for several years, at least about 6 years, we've been discussing how our repository can qualify for CoreTrustSeal certification, keeping in mind that the Dataverse software provides numerous functions by default that satisfy some of the CoreTrustSeal requirements. As Philip mentioned, it's not all technical, but the Dataverse software provides a lot of that. We started to discuss how we could use well-curated collections in our repository that were supported by a curation or a data management team outside of the Harvard Dataverse, keeping in mind that sometimes they work in collaboration with our team here at IQSS, but using them as a possible model for certification. We knew that our entire repository collection would not meet the requirements because of the self-curated workflow model we use. People who are coming in and want a DOI immediately and just need to preserve their space quickly, they don't do as good of a job of curating their data as these overall larger collections that are coming from organizations and institutions and have a team of curators and data managers behind them. So we knew that some of our collections would be prime examples, though, of what CoreTrustSeal was looking for in terms of not just policies, but how they were using the Dataverse features and how they were managing the collection that was coming into the repository. So our plan for the CoreTrustSeal application is outlined here. So after reviewing the CoreTrustSeal application process and the requirements, we took notes of sections of the application that the data and repository would need to satisfy in order to meet CoreTrustSeal approval. So as we go through the requirements in CoreTrustSeal, we're thinking, okay, the repository is responsible for this. That's our development team and the Harvard Dataverse curation team and staff members and the software. But then there's also a section that the data managers can contribute to for these managed collections that we want to certify. We determined that we could reach out to 30 collections for our initial certification process, knowing that not everyone would be on board or ready for the work entailed. But since this was also a model, we didn't want to strive for a very high number and put in a lot of work and effort into something that might not be certified. Our team reviewed these collections, both old and new, and we assessed the quality and activity of each collection to determine if they would be a good fit for our model. We reviewed their data management websites, their use of the Dataverse features to move data towards FAIR, to get an overall picture of the collection's strengths and weaknesses in relation to the CoreTrustSeal requirements. And if they were interested in participating, we would help them correct their collection shortcomings as needed, including the development of policies and good practices to address every section of the CoreTrustSeal requirements that they were required to have. We provided each collection with 3 documents that I'll share, summarizing their overall data sharing using the repository. We gave them a document that explained how they currently meet the policy guidelines required by CoreTrustSeal when it comes to curation. We gave them a document about how they are using or not using the Dataverse features to move their data towards FAIR. And we created a memo of understanding with each collection on how the collection needs to be maintained going forward if they are certified. And these memorandums of agreement will also help us to support them with policies that they need to have on their websites, front-facing policies that are required by the CoreTrustSeal group in order for them to meet requirements. Because we wanted to be sure that each managed collection was supported for their data sharing needs, we had to break our sample into a few categories. So most of the managed collections, the 30 collections that we looked at, were organizations, journals, historical collections, which I'll explain, and licensed collections. So managed collections overall were actively depositing data. They actively had a curation team. They actively have a website with policies on how they manage data and bring data into Harvard Dataverse. They were still, almost all of them were missing some kind of documentation on data sharing practices. We also have what we call historical collections, and these are collections that are no longer funded. They're sundowned is what we call them, but they meet FAIR standards and they deserve recognition for their curation and governance when it existed, and they're supported by the Harvard Dataverse data management team, because when those teams are no longer available to be contacted about their data, we're the ones who take over some of that responsibility. The licensed collections are collections purchased for access by such places as Harvard, right, for their affiliates. These collections often perform some level of curation on the data before sharing, and they're making use of the Dataverse features to move their data towards FAIR. So we thought they would also be a good example to include in our model. And finally, we have journal collections, and we needed to highlight the important details of how journals should share their data in these MOUs and in these documentations that we are creating. So for journals, it would include things like reproducibility verification, bidirectional linking between the article and the data, and controlled workflows so that journal editors could manage the content that was being deposited into their repository space, review the content that was deposited, and publish it or send it back to the author for more information. So what I have here is just the model that talks about what we do. So this will be our model going forward, where we identify curated collections that would meet our managed collections requirements, right? They have a team, they have some policies in place. They do a good job of using the features, maybe not all the features they need to, but these are the collections that we look for. We review the collections, look at the existing policies, existing use of features, existing curation practice. We present these collections with a summary of the review that we've done, and we note the places that they need to improve to move their collection towards certification. Now, if you'll see, we've broken down the collections into what I just talked about, because in terms of license collection, historical collections, journal collections, because each one has a specific need that needs to be captured in the MOUs that they're going to agree to. And so once we have an agreement and these collections on our board, we continue to develop the MOUs. We help them to develop policies if they're missing them on their front-facing policies page. We incorporate best practices in Dataverse feature usage for their existing collections by helping them to update their repository space. We help them to update their collection policy website, and then and we make sure the collections are incorporating best practice recommendations from the Harvard data team.
You think you can finish up in about a minute or so, Sonia?
I think so. So the Harvard Dataverse CoreTrustSeal certification model, right? So we talked about that after selecting the 30 collections, confirming their participation, we had 15 collections that agreed to participate for now, mostly because of the amount of work. We provided each collection with a rubric on how they meet requirements currently, largely focused on FAIR, how they're using the features and what they need to improve, and then the memo of understanding, okay? So this is just an example of some of the review that we did with using the CoreTrustSeal requirements at the top, mission, scope, licensing, and we took each collection and we just talked about how they're meeting and how they're not meeting the requirements at this point. So we did this for the 15 collections. And then we also went through the Dataverse, more of the features. Again, we refer to the matrix and we say if they need it, if it's incomplete, if they're using it. And as you can see, there's a lot of people that need it to have a lot of the requirements from the CoreTrustSeal still added to their policy page of those 15 collections. Excuse me, because I lost something. And these are the Dataverse features. And so we had collections that we went through, and we basically created a rubric of what they were using to move their data towards FAIR based on the Dataverse features we provide for that purpose. And as you can see, there's a lot of no's. Some people were using content by default. Some people were making some use of some of the metadata fields they needed, others were not. And we also took a look at, files, the type of files they were depositing. Were they using the best files, open files in their collections or not? So it was a lot of work for 15 collections, but this is our plan going forward, that it would be a small collection of data that we would do every year. This is part of the memorandum of agreement of a MOU that we defined between us and the collection. It's actually about a 10-page document that just outlines everything they're doing, and it confirms whether they have the documentation needed and required by CoreTrustSeal. And so here is an example of the criteria we use to select and help journals, for example, that they're using the journal metadata block that's provided in the Dataverse software, that they're customizing their page with policy links, that they have instructions for authors on their website on how to deposit data in the proper formats into Dataverse, and that they're utilizing some of the features that we make available for data discoverability. And so supporting documentation for managed collections and Dataverse installations were also put together. So As we talked about before, Phil mentioned the Dataverse CoreTrustSeal guide that was developed for the technical aspects of how Dataverse installations could apply for CoreTrustSeal. But we also have a curation service model that we are developing with my team on how we can help collections meet these requirements, and it would be a paid service that we would provide to collections using the Harvard Dataverse repository. Almost done, Katie. Here's some information on the guide that Philip talked about. It's really more of the technical support that the Dataverse software offers to support CoreTrustSeal. And so we wanted consistency across the installations, the Dataverse installation repositories, on how they apply for CoreTrustSeal in terms of the technical aspects. So of course, we're also developing best practices for using the Dataverse software features, because we think all collections can benefit from this, but those organizations and institutions that really want to apply for certification would have access to this document on how to use the features to meet those requirements. And so these are just some of the conversations we are having, hoping to submit our model soon. Collections are very willing to help us improve their Dataverse Choice Fair if we are on board to help them. We find the collection websites can improve on information they present in front-facing policies, because a lot of their policies were hidden or just for them. We're working with development team to tag certified collections within the Harvard Dataverse repository. So for generalist repositories, it would be either a facet or a featured collections or badges added to collections to capture the fact that they are certified for CoreTrustSeal. And of course, we hope to work with the CoreTrustSeal board to develop the model for generalist repositories as we can. And thank you very much. And as Katie mentioned, we have the Dataverse Community meeting taking place in June. The registration link is on these slides that we will share. And you could also contact support if you have any questions, but it would be great to see you all there. And I am done.
All right, great. Yes, I hope lots of people do join us at our community meeting. It's great. It's a great way to get introduced to the software and the community. We do have a few questions in the last couple minutes we've got. There's a very good one for Philip specifically. It says, you mentioned that one of the challenges you faced, was related to the creation of a preservation plan. Was this accompanied by the implementation of a preservation platform as well at your institute, or was an archival storage repository such as Dataverse deemed to be sufficient to obtain the CoreTrustSeal certification?
We haven't implemented a preservation platform yet. So in our preservation plan, it's not based on a preservation platform. This is one of the things we will need to do to automate this. Right now, it's all the steps we are doing are described in the preservation plan. So it's basically a manual thing, apart from automatic checksum checking and stuff like that, which is done automatically by the Dataverse software. But for instance, we describe different levels of preservation. So for instance, if data files are provided only if data files are provided in a preferred file format, we commit to convert them to another sustainable file format if this is necessary, let us say in 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, I don't know. But if a data file is not provided in a preferred format, we don't commit to this kind of preservation actions. So yeah, so we will definitely look into a preservation platform, and also we have been talking on a national level that all data archives should have a kind of a common national provider of long-term preservation, but so far this hasn't worked out yet. So yeah.
Thanks. Philip, I also wanted to point out just another question in the Q&A about a 2009 article that you referenced. If you wouldn't mind typing a citation of that in the Q&A, that'd be great.
Yeah, and also the presentation will be available afterwards.
Wonderful. All right, so I think we've got time for one more question, maybe. Anne asks if there's any library of information about the common repository software, like DSpace, regarding how they might meet some certification aspects. Maybe Bob, you might be the best to answer this if you know of any other type of guidance for different types of repository software. We talked a little bit about Dataverse, but if there's other software guidance that you know of.
Yes, I think the best place to go is on the CoreTrustSeal website. You can access a list of the certified repositories, and that list contains a link to each repository application. So that's the application that they submitted with all of their answers or responses to each of the requirements. And so in there, you can read, and my suggestion is to look at recent ones, because those are the ones that are using the most current CoreTrustSeal requirements, and read through those. And some of them are using all different types of software in addition to Dataverse. I know there are some Dataverse ones in there, some Fedora related ones, etc. And so the applications describe the software they're using, and that's a good way to review, independent of the software aspect, the kinds of requirements or the kinds of responses that are being looked for within the requirements, and as well the kinds of infrastructure and capabilities that the repositories have established in order to meet the requirements.
Thanks, Bob. So I think before Liz pops in and kicks us all out of here, I just wanted to say thanks to everybody for joining. If you have any questions about Dataverse, feel free to reach out to either me or Sonia or Philip. I'm sure would be happy to answer questions. Or yeah, happy to follow up in other ways. So unfortunately, couldn't see everybody that joined in the webinar version of Zoom, but thanks for joining anyway.
All right, thank you so much. That was an excellent panel, and I learned a lot, and hope everyone else did too. So just a reminder, join us for the closing session in the other Zoom room. And in that closing session, there's going to be a talk about the Ideas Challenge and the ongoing, the process for the ongoing year-long Ideas Challenge. And if you're interested, there's a list of ideas taking shape over in a Google document that I've just pasted into the chat, so you can see what people are thinking of. But we'll share it again in the closing session, I'm sure. But if you have ideas and you want to add them, this Google document is the place to do it. And with that, I'll give you a couple of minutes and see you in the closing session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.